Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, everyone. Welcome to the Chancleta Generation Podcast. Woohoo! Hi, everyone. I am, as you know, hopefully by now, Jesus Christ, it's been like 3 years now. I am Clemencia, and I am your host, and I am also the founder of Moira Studio, which is an advertising agency that communicates with Latinos in the U.S. And today we are continuing our series on exactly what I do, which is communicating with Latinos. And last episode, we saw it from the point of view of sports marketing. We spoke with Laura Stefan, and she was awesome. If you have not listened to that, please go back and listen to it. And today we are going to continue the conversation and looking at it from the social aspect of it, which is also an aspect that we work with at Moira Studio. Of course, you want to make money, but you can also use your skills to advance our community. What do you think? Who would have thought? All right, so with us today we have Laura Camila, who is a strategic marketing and communications expert, operations consultant, and founder of Cami Studio, a marketing agency dedicated to helping organizations best serve their communities. As Alpha Puerto Rico's president, Laura tackles the island's brain drain by fostering professional development and bridges diaspora efforts with Puerto Rican causes. At Archipelago Strategies Group, she serves as a senior strategy advisor, driving marketing solutions for multicultural audiences. Named in El Mundo's Boston Latino 30 Under 30, Laura is published author and speaker on marketing-driven social change. She is now pursuing a master's in policy management at Georgetown through the National Urban Fellows Program and is currently supporting the NFL Player Care Foundation, where she empowers retired players in their career transitions. Girl, you've been busy.
Hello. Excited to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction. We like to keep busy, that's for sure.
Oh my God, I can see that. So that's pretty awesome. That's great. I have so many questions, of course, as usual. But I love to know when, like, to me, there was a moment in which I had that breakthrough of like, I am going to be using my skill set to do good for the community and not just sell bars of soap or whatever. I'd love to know yours.
Sure. I'm happy to share. I think there's maybe two different points in my life where this became a factor. One is definitely thank you to my mommy and my papi. I grew up in Puerto Rico. My parents were pastors, and everything that I started to do in the marketing world was to help them, communicate with the communities around them, to provide services, to provide food and do food drives, to do summer camps. And for me, marketing always was purpose-centric. And then a little bit later in my career, after having been able to work at under the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development and see the real power that communications and marketing can have at a state level, at a federal level, I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization in Puerto Rico that was called A Comer PR, coordinating food drives, community gardens, and some advocacy on Capitol Hill to support the NAP to SNAP transition in Puerto Rico. And I started seeing that no matter what I did, I always hit a wall. Right? You could try and build these amazing programs, but the decisions at the end of the day were being made by people who were not connected to the communities, who didn't have an understanding of what the communities needed. And that's when I decided that I needed to, educate myself to be able to be that bridge from the perspective of marketing and communications, right? So that's why I'm currently, studying public policy. But the idea is, how can I bring, both of these audiences together a little bit more? How can I help the communities at a grassroots level let other people know what they need, and how can I let the people who are trying to serve them actually have an understanding of what they need. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. Because to me, one of the really important things about communicating with Latinos is not just like speaking the language, using the slang. It's also like finding them where they are, right? And it's like, to me, when one of the first moments in which I realized, how lacking the marketing world was in communicating with Latinos was when we started working with some also nonprofit organizations. And, we realized that some of these people have really old phones, like they may not have smartphones. They may not be reading the newspaper. They may be just reading like paper newsletters that they get in their houses. And so we were like, how is it that we could get information to people with what we can't force them to like go and like, no, you need to look at the news so you can get your information. How we can find them where they are, so then we can give them the information that they need. And that's just like, it really just takes a little bit of research and and also like a little bit of care and saying, okay, where can I find these people? And that's a really important thing. You could be running, millions of dollars on TV ads, and if the right people aren't watching them, then guess what? You're throwing that money out.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's also about leaning on the community leaders that also know the answers, because there's not going to be a one way to do this, right? There's a community of Latinos in Massachusetts that responds differently than a community of Latinos in Nueva York, and you have to know who to get to in those areas to get to them.
Yes. Community leaders are very underappreciated in the marketing world, but they are so important. Like in the organizing world, they're so important. And sometimes, the marketing and the organizing are not really communicating with each other, especially when it comes to, civic engagement or more community related things. And they really should, because these community leaders have so much information on, where to find the people, what is it that they care about, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, community leaders are the OG influencers.
Yes.
Community leaders are who you told something to. If you needed everyone else to hear it, you need to go tell the community leader locally, and they will make sure everyone else has heard it. They're basically like influencers without the socials.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, your parents, pastors are community leaders. They are the ones that also disseminate information. They let people know about things. They have announcements during services. And so I know this all seems super old school to people. Oh, what about social media and Instagram and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's also there. But the grassroots part of it and the word of mouth, I don't think that people realize how important that is still. And even in the younger generation, it's still, word of mouth is how Latinos work. Every time that, I don't know, somebody moves into a new city, they go on social media and they ask people, can you recommend me a new doctor, a gynecologist, a dentist, a nail tech, a handyman or whatever. People still rely on word of mouth. And so it's about how to use the content that you have to kind of motivate the word of mouth some more.
Yeah, and social media is just a new format of word of mouth, right? Organic social media specifically, right? We're looking at people who leave reviews, people who leave Facebook comments. Like these are the individuals that are creating content without us even asking for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the content that people trust.
Yes, and especially when it comes to Latinos, I know that Anglos do it too, but like Latinos is like they actually go to the doctor and say, my fulanito, he really spoke really highly of you. you know, and they're
Absolutely.
like, and they're expected to get the treatment because, you know, the fulanito told them about it and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's the way that it works. It still works that way. So that thank you for bringing that up, because that's such an important point of, about communicating with Latinos. It's not just, you know, we talk about this a lot, you know, using the right language, using the right faces, using the right slang, music, whatever, but it's also using the right ways of communication.
Absolutely. It's those channels that can make all of the difference, especially in minority audiences that have inherent distrust, right? You know, rightfully so. There's reasons to be distrustful. But to get through that distrust, you have to break through it through different channels.
Yeah. And so I guess one of the things that I'm also curious to hear is, I'm sure you've encountered misinformation, as you just mentioned, right? As a marketing specialist, what steps have you taken, or like with you or your team or the, you know, or the other organizations that you've worked with, how are you guys tackling misinformation?
That's a great question. I think a lot of what we do is really hone back to that trusted source, right? And try and make sure that you have individuals that you are following or engaging with that can be considered a trusted source for you. Those individuals, not that you trust yourself, other people trust them as well. And those can be influencers like, you know, Priyanka Graulao, I think her name is, that the Puerto Rican influencer that talks about, you know, politics and what's going on the islands. Or they could be, you know, the bodega around the corner that, like, you know, that Titi there always has all the information. Like, that's the person that you trust. That's the person that you're gonna get your best information from. So really tapping into those like sources of truth, I think, is really important, because it's really hard these days to ask people to do their own research.
Oh yeah.
It's become incredibly difficult. And even if you put something in front of people and you're like, here are the citations and the research, and people are anxious, and they're gonna look at that and they're not gonna be sure, right? So because of how much misinformation is out there, it is so important to tap into your like source of truth, truly.
Yeah. And I mean, the chismes they're, you know, you can't avoid them. They will always happen. It's more about like spreading the right chisme.
Exactly. And I love chisme, right? Like, I think to not go down that rabbit hole. I mean, I think like chisme for me, it has been eye-opening, and it has given me opportunities. And we call it chisme. Really, it's networking. We're networking. We're having conversations. We're sharing information and data with each other, and that has been, belittled and sometimes even like demonized. Ay, no sea chismosa. Like, well, hear me out. Maybe people should know, what that man did. Like maybe the world would be a better place if everyone knew some of these things. So I always look at chisme. I'm like, there's a really positive side to chisme that we just try and like hide under the rug because we don't want to talk about certain things. We should talk about them.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because everybody knows that information is power, right? And when it comes to the social aspect of marketing, you are handling information. Like if you're trying to get, I don't know, let's just say, if you're trying to get a bunch of Latina women to get, exams for breast cancer, right? They need information on like, why is it important? Where do you get tested? Also data on like, Latina women are more likely to get breast cancer at a certain age than other demographics. Or if you have a history of whatever, then you should get tested. Things like that. All of this is, everybody's like, oh yeah, of course. But how did you learn about that? Your mom didn't tell you. That's not something you hear at the bodega in the back. It's like, this is stuff that you have learned over commercials and ads and literature that you've seen at your doctor and all of that, because sometimes because it's important to them and it's for you to know. Now, if that information is, for example, not in Spanish, or the information did not make it to that community, then what's going to happen? So information is power, and when you're talking about social change, people need more education. We were just talking about this right before we hit record. Information is education. And then I'm not just talking about like if you got straight A's or anything like that in school. It's more about knowing how things work. And you said that like people are not going to do the research because sometimes, Latinos are working 3 jobs, they have kids, they're hustling out there. We're all hustling out there. Who's got the time? When you sit down to vote, and you look at the ballot, sometimes you're like, I don't even know what this means. Like, who are these people? What are like circuit judges of what? You know what I mean? You're like, who are all these people? And that's important to know. This is why sometimes there are ballot guides. Ballot guides are important. So you don't have to go out and like research all of that because you don't have time. You could just, you get your information very concise in things that matter to you. And so, it's our responsibility to give the people the right information at the right time and in the right context, in the right size. Because it's like, let me tell you about breast cancer. No, I'm not gonna read all that.
No one's gonna read 30 pages on that. Absolutely not. No, and I agree with you entirely. I think like the right time, the right information is so important for our communities to have access to. But it's also about, hand-holding people through a process, right? And that's when I think, the creating the content that you need to be creating becomes so important, because you can give somebody one long article with all of this information and they're not going to process it. But if you divide that into 5 or 6 different social media posts that you're putting out consistently, sending back to that blog, you're giving people the food in a digestible way, right? Like the knowledge in a way that is easier for them to take in on the go, because we're all on the go all the time, right? And that's what you mentioned about, finding people where they are and then finding people where they always are. Right? Because, I could walk by a billboard one day and see it and then never walk by it again. But if I know that I'm going to go get milk every day down the corner store and I walk by their little board right there with their pushpin flyers and I see that every day, if you're adding new information on there, I'm seeing that every day. I'm seeing that every single day. And it takes 7 to 13 touches for something to really impact somebody, right? For something to lead to a decision, a change or something. So being where you need to be over and over again is incredibly important.
Yeah. Love that. And also, let's change subjects a little bit, because the other aspect of me realizing, how dire the situation was like, and I still see it, and I'm not gonna mention who, but just the other day, I was passing in front of a bank, a big bank, and the ad that they had on their window was not translated correctly.
Oh, doesn't that happen? Yeah.
I am not saying any names, but I'm still seeing it. So
that's crazy, especially with all of the resources available nowadays and all of the professionals in the space. You would think that wouldn't happen anymore, but here
I know.
we are.
I'm like, how many eyes did that go through? Dios mío. So yeah, let's talk about that. I don't even know where to start. Like, how is it that, it's not about translation anymore?
And that's the thing. They maybe like translated something directly, and that's the problem. People think you can put something into Google Translate, y ya. You're like, what I got back, that's Spanish. I'm like, okay, but is it the right Spanish? Are you saying what you meant to say? And that's where transcreation comes to play, right? Being able to create in both languages, in multiple languages, and bring one concept across those different audiences in a way that's effective. It's not easy, but it needs to be done, because you're going to look very silly at an audience that you're trying to target if you're not paying special care to this. And it's not just like idioms and when pigs fly, that's not going to translate, right?
Right.
It's literal translations that do not make sense sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, I've mentioned this before, but I want to hear from somebody else, because I sound like a broken record. How do you feel when you see something that is poorly translated?
That is so incredibly disheartening. And it makes me upset, because you're looking at something that went through how many people, and no one along that line spoke Spanish. No one along that line of people who need to sign off, the person who printed whatever banners, the person who put it up, right? Even up to that level, so many people are seeing this. No one walked by that and in a decision-making capacity said, this does not work. This does not work. And that just shows the lack of representation in the space sometimes, because, and if they are there, maybe they're not being listened to. And that's another problem. They're not being tapped into for these types of things. But you can't have an entire marketing department put something out in a different language and not have somebody who speaks that language engage in that process.
Yeah.
It's offensive.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think it's disrespectful, first of all. And then second, you're going to lose those clients or those prospects. If you were an Anglo person and you spoke in English and you saw something misspelled on an advertising, how would you feel about that brand? You're like, they're sloppy. If they're a bank, they're like, well, if they do this with the, spelling of something that went through so many eyes, then how are they going to take care of my money? Or just things like that. It just doesn't look good on you. Mm-hmm. And so it's taking really care of that. It's not just run it through Google Translate. Nobody's going to notice. People are going to notice.
People are always going to notice. And at the end of the day, yes, you're losing prospects, you're losing clients, but you're also just losing that trust. Right. And it's so much harder to regain trust than it is to lose trust. Right. You don't want to be losing trust, because it takes, 3-4 times the effort to regain that trust. If it took, 10 touches to gain that trust, it's going to take 30-40 touches to regain it. And really, that's just bad business.
Yeah.
That's just a bad business model.
Yeah.
To have to reinvest so much to regain that audience that you lost because of sloppiness early on.
Yeah. And it goes back to, a word that we used a lot, and is being authentic, right? And if you authentically care about speaking with Latinos, then you would take care of those details. The lack of the detail tells us that you don't really care that much, or you are pretending to care, which, hey, I'm not saying any names, I'm not pointing any fingers, but I know that there's brands out there that are just like, oh, this is just a money decision for me, which is fine, but just hire somebody that cares at least.
If it's a money decision, put some money on it. Let's do that, right? I'm not under any assumption that corporations out there are turning to the Latino audience because they really want them to feel included and involved and they want to engage with them. No, this is a money decision. The Hispanic population in the US is responsible for a huge amount of like economic impact, right? A huge amount. You would be silly not to want to engage with the Latino community, right? Like that's it's a good business decision, and I respect that. But if you're going to want to try and get money out of these communities, then you better hire somebody, you better invest in somebody that is going to be able to create culturally authentic content instead of generalized, Google translated type of things, because it's language, which is one thing, and that's super important, right? Never to take away from language, but it's also integrating, cultural themes, like, certain cultures respond really strongly to pride, to heritage, right? To their identity. Like, how are you looping all of these things in to help carry somebody along that journey to make that purchasing decision, right? Or that decision to make a decision about something else, right? At the end of the day, if you are resonating culturally, you're going to have a much better impact, and it's going to be a much better use of your time and energy and your money.
Yeah. I mean, this is not, I speak for myself, obviously. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but to me, this is not like a social justice project. Like I said at the beginning, it's good to make money. You gotta survive. You gotta eat. It's good. But if you're doing it with like a good purpose, then it's even better. And it's like, for some companies, this is not a social justice project. You don't need to be all DEI. It's money, but if you're gonna make money, you gotta do it right, like everything else.
Yeah, you just got to do it right. And at the end of the day, like, there are people who are professionals in being able to support, an organization through those processes. Invest in the people and the resources that you need to position yourself, again, as a business decision in a better place. Right now, whether or not you are bringing like an inherent value to that audience, that's something that, that's between you and your checkbook. But at the end of the day, it's silly not to invest in these communities. It's silly not to try and market to these communities, especially communities that, like, for example, are traditionally more loyal to brands. So like Latinos are statistically more loyal to a brand and then, Anglos, I guess, would be the word. If you think about that, like, you are investing on selling something once and then selling it again and then selling it again. You're going to have to invest every single time, or you snatch up a Latino consumer and they're going to keep buying it for the rest of their life, right? They're super loyal. And it becomes a part of their life. And you all of a sudden have a recurring investment that's costing you nothing.
Exactly. And they're the ones that tell their cousins and their sister and their tío and everybody else about this brand. Because they like it, and because there's word of mouth. So that's free advertising right there for you.
It all goes back to authenticity. It all goes back to being able, and even if you're talking about different cultural populations, sure, but talking about like, Gen Z and Gen A, authenticity is everything. Authenticity is everything. So you need to hook those people who are going to authentically speak about the services and the goods that you're providing, because those are the ones that are going to be able to influence people. You can give somebody money to influence people, but that's not going to be as impactful as an individual who is out here doing it on their own.
Yes, and that actually cares, and they want to do it right, and they want to do right by the people. And so it's like, it goes back to, being mission driven, when you're doing it. And, the upper one doesn't have to be mission driven, but the people who are on the ground should be, and not just on the ground, like a knocking on the door. It's like the people who are putting out the content, the people who are the face of the content, all of that. Those are the ones that actually do need to care, because people will tell from a mile away if they don't.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, right, like the people at the top, money may be one of the best motivators, but a lot of the organizations that are super successful nowadays are mission driven at the top, right? Like, and maybe that mission looks different at different levels, right? Like maybe your high level mission is, we need to make the world better with this product, right? Or we need to
like
make,
all the CEOs say.
Exactly. Like, okay, that's your mission. I love that. But if you're going to then, try and talk to specific audiences, you want people who have missions in those audiences as well. Because that's what's going to resonate, right? Like in mi casa, my grandma doesn't care about your mission to make the world a better place with this product, right? Unless she hears somebody say, okay, well, my mission is to make your world better with this product. Okay, now I'm listening.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right. Well, I love this conversation. I could talk about this for hours. Do you have any more goods to share with us?
I think we're looking at these like underrepresented communities that have been historically underrepresented. And we're just asking for, more representation.
More representation. More of us.
More of us. And not because it's the right thing to do, even though it is. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the best thing to do for the bottom line, for the community, for the impact, for the growth of our society and our economy. Like, why aren't we working together more? Why aren't we bringing more people to the forefront?
Yeah.
That's my hill to die.
Yeah. I love that because, we've talked about this before in our podcast. If you want more hardworking, awesome women in your workforce, you got to put some more women in your workforce because they got to see themselves in that position. Representation, just period representation is important. So same thing. Hey, you're selling a beer. Obviously, whatever, that's not mission driven. But if you don't put people that look like themselves on that screen, they're going to be like, oh, that's just some, redneck beer. And then not for me. I'm going to put it plain and simple like
Yeah, no, that's what it is, right? And I think if you are... there's two steps here, right? Like you could be putting diverse people in your materials so that you're targeting these audiences. And that's one step closer to the right direction. And then the next step closer is creating content specifically for these audiences, right? Like that representation is going to be so much more impactful. So you've got a couple steps. And I think everyone is in a journey, right? Like everyone is at one of these steps on their way to becoming, better at what they do in this space. Like those are the steps that you need to take. If your organization right now is not representing people in your materials, is not showing, the diversity, that's step one. That's diversity, right? Once we get diversity in the door, and once you've seen more of a range, then you need to start working towards, true inclusion, right? Like true involvement and engagement at that extra level. Not to be all DEI on them.
No, this is all about money. This is all about money.
Right. It's all about money. It's fine.
We'll just sneak in. Oh, it's all about money. Well, here.
But that's the thing. It comes together, right? Yeah. I want people to make money. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Let's do it. And you know who's going to help you with that? These minority and underrepresented audiences.
Yeah.
That are every day becoming a bigger powerhouse economically and financially in the US.
Yeah. And those communities that you were like, oh, those people that are like, they are now having billions of dollars of spending power. So investing in those communities should be a priority. Alrighty. With that, Laura Camila, thank you so much. This was fun.
So much fun. Thank you for having me.
I love talking about this. Like I said, I could talk about this for hours. But where can we find you? Give me some socials.
I love that. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Laura Camila Rivera. And you can also find me on Instagram at Laura Camila Creates. That is where I'm posting most of my stuff right now and engaging with my audience. So if anyone is interested in connecting, talking more about these types of things, I'm, willing and able.
I'm going to be there. All right.
I'm excited to see you there.
So if you want to get in touch with me, I hope you know where I am. Clem@chancletageneration.com. On the Instagram, Chancleta Generation. On the TikToks, Chancleta Gen. And on X, it kind of like phased it out because that guy's kind of yicky. So if you like this podcast, give us a rating, tell your friends, do that word of mouth, tell the bodega guy in the corner about this podcast because he should be listening to it.
He should.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you on the next episode.